The best way to get into the Hall of Fame is to have statistics like this next guy, Billy Simons. He's another guy who's got 40 years plus in the racing game. And his statistics include 10 track championships, 8 of those at Waterford Speed Bowl. He had 2 at Riverside Park. He won both the modified and the sportsman title, same year, same driver at Waterford Speed Bowl. That's the time when you could qualify. They'd have a sportsman race, and they would take the top 2 or 3 cars, put those in against the modifieds, and it wasn't uncommon for Billy's car to win the modified race also. So, pretty good statistics. 100 plus wins at tracks such as Plainville Stadium, Waterford Speed Bowl, Riverside Park, Stafford Speedway, Monadnock. He also won on dirt at Lebanon Valley, Thompson, and his cars raced from Maine, Oxford, all the way down to New Smyrna, Florida, up and down the coast. Lots of races in those 40 years. Let me give you a list of his drivers. He had a lot of them. The first 4 you might not recognize, because I certainly don't, but he had Roy Peck, Babe Warner, Stan Spencer, and Squeaky Rogers. Now, I don't know how many of you out there besides Billy and his folks know those names. I don't know them, maybe you do. But let's get into the guys that really well-known, many of them Hall of Famers, and brought Billy a lot of wins in his years. Charlie Webster, Hank Stevens, Ray Delisle, Wild Bill Scrivener, Don Collins, Dickie Dunn, Gene Bergen, Bobby Santos, Ernie Gahan, Jerry Dostie, Jerry Pearl, Freddie Schultz, Bobby Turner from Maine, Leo Cleary, Eddie Flemke Sr., Bob Potter, Lenny Cleaves, Flying Brian Ross, Ronnie Wyckoff, S.J. Avancian, Daring Dick Casso. Dick brought Billy his first win at Stafford after he moved up from Waterford. Stan Greger brought Billy 2 track championships at Riverside Park. Merv Treichler, Mike Stefanik, Don DeRozier, George Kent, Rick Donnerly, Reggie Ruggiero, yours truly. I drove for Billy a total of 6 different seasons. Bob Polari drove for him. Mike McLaughlin drove for him at Riverside Park. John Rosati, Hall of Fame, drove for him. Marty Radrick, Ricky Summers, Doug Wilcott, Bruce D'Alessandro, and Dan Avery. Dan Avery ended his career with Billy at Monadnock Speedway. Let's talk a quick minute on where it all started, and it actually, the Simons excavator car started with Billy's brother Fred. He started in the late 40s, rented a car 3-4 years, got out of it, and Billy decided to take over, and he rented a car from early 50s right till 1993. Billy owned an excavating business. He took over from his dad, Clifford. He had a dozer, backhoe, dump truck. And one thing about Billy, his equipment, whether it be the race equipment or his construction equipment, a lot of times he didn't have the newest stuff with the construction equipment, but always top notch. I would visit Billy in the winter, always taking care of his equipment, his dozer, backhoe, always tip-top shape, and he used that same kind of approach with his racing. His cars broke down very little, and his construction equipment broke down very little. Driving for him for 6 seasons, I got a little story to tell. It's a story of a good time and a bad time. The bad time had nothing to do with Billy or his car. It had to do with the driver, and you're looking at him. It was 1985, hot summer night. We were going up to Riverside Park. We were running Riverside for the season, and we went out for warm-ups. Now, I know many of you know how those steering wheels snap onto the steering shaft. They got to snap in place, and once they're there, but you better have them snapped on. Well, I go out for warm-ups, couple laps, Come out of the second turn, the steering wheel is in my hand. We slept the wall pretty good, tore up the front end. And you can imagine Billy wasn't too happy. I get on the hook, and they drag me into the pits. I'm still sitting in the car. Freddie was always with Billy. You could count on if you were at the track with Billy, you always saw Freddie there. Freddie comes over to me, he says, "What happened?" I says, "The wheel came off." He starts looking around the car. "Which wheel?" I says, "This one." That wasn't a good night. We loaded up, went home, and I could have got fired on the spot. Billy's a patient car owner, and we come back, we raced. 2 weeks later, they got the NASCAR Modified Tour had just started in 1985, and they were having an event at Waterford. Now, Waterford that's Billy's home track. He started down there. Everybody knew Billy Simons and the Simons 9 at Waterford. We're going to go down to Waterford. I wasn't a big fan of Waterford. I'd never done too much there, but that's where Billy wanted to race. I was all for it. So we go down. From the time we unloaded that car, climbed in, I never drove a car that was more domineering. The car was just on rails. Mickey Mouse could have driven that car that night, but it was one of those nights, and everybody was there. It was the Modified Tour, Richie, Bugsy, George Kent, Brian Ross, you name it, they were all there, Modified Tour. Well, we qualified third in time trials, and I was no time trialer. We started off and we just took off. Well, it just goes to say you can have a bad night in racing and you can have a good night. And that night, Billy was just ecstatic, the crew was ecstatic, the fans loved it, the Simons 9 was back at Waterford in Winter Circle, but we did have one problem. Jerry Cook had just been promoted to tour director. He came over, he knew that was a Riverside car. There's no way a Riverside car is going to beat NASCAR Modified Tour at Waterford Speed Bowl. Don't touch that car. We're going to inspect it from front to back. Well, I went home. Well, they inspected, and they inspected more. And as always, Billy ran a legal car. They couldn't find a thing, and it was just a great way to finish a night after a bad win, and then 2 weeks later having that. And I felt so good for winning for myself, and extremely proud of winning for Billy. So that was a great night. So Billy, my honor. I'm tickled pink that you're in the Hall of Fame. You and Janet can get back in a couple of days to that warm weather. I know you're missing that already, although it hasn't been that warm down in Florida. But proud to welcome you to the Hall of Fame, and hope you come back up from time to time and see us.
And I want to thank the Hall of Fame for inducting me in there. And I'd like to thank all my sponsors and all my drivers and all my friends that helped me on the car and through. And I want to say special thanks to my brother, Fred, and also my nephew, Richard. Thank you.